Yeah, thank you very much for having me, first of all. So, what's happening in markets right now, as you mentioned, with the various moves in markets, markets are basically waiting in anticipation for the next big thing. And the next big thing is going to be the US fiscal stimulus. Markets are aware that it's on its way, whether it comes before the US presidential election or after, it's certainly on its way. And when it does come, that'll be the next big thing, the big crucial market mover. So right now, markets are waiting in anticipation. The the interesting thing to note is that last time when this was introduced, a fiscal stimulus back in March, it caused a huge rally in assets, not just in equities, but in also safer assets or defensive assets such as gold. And the reason is that as long as the risks and uncertainties that were there back in March still continued, the risks surrounding the virus, for example, we see this dynamic possibly continuing. And this dynamic where risk assets as well as defensive assets continue to do well even after the next round of fiscal stimulus. So the big thing that investors are looking at, and that's possibly driving some volatility in the short term, because the more that a fiscal stimulus gets delayed, the more anguish there might be in the short term. So that explains the bit of volatility at the moment.
Mobeen, what significance would you attribute to the Netflix disappointment overnight? How does that need to reshape the way we're thinking about not only the big misses we're seeing on analyst estimates, but the fact that here's a tech leader that's done extraordinarily well that has now disappointed the market?
That's, of course, there is always that risk that in any given quarter, there will be a disappointment for companies. Third quarter, US data outside of corporates, even economic data is something that remains a risk factor for markets. And of course, it remains a risk factor for individual companies. Having said that, at WisdomTree, we believe that the tech story that has been so strong this year is certainly not over. In fact, the fiscal stimulus, what it can do is it may very well provide a turbo boost to the tech sector. The reality is that certain business models are just better placed to navigate the current economic environment. And just take, for example, another tech company, Zoom, for example, that has seen its share price multiply by a multiple of 7 so far this year. It's just because the pandemic has accelerated this technological megatrend of us moving towards an online world, and Netflix is also one of the beneficiaries of that. In contrast, if you take an example of an airlines like American Airways, we were just talking about airlines a second ago before I came on. Airlines need the world to go back to the way it was in 2019. So there will be winners and losers, or may I say winners and companies that are still trying to survive this current economic environment. And a fiscal stimulus will probably just exacerbate that trend.